Welcome to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, mysterious voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I have found in my travels, and I have quite an interesting and weird story to talk about today. I am talking about a book that I read, one that is about divorce and disguises. I am referring to Alias, Madame Doubtfire by Anne Fine, which was published in 1987. For those who don't know, Anne Fine is an English writer who's been writing since the 1970s. And she's mostly been writing children's fiction or young adult fiction with some more adult-centric stories here and there. She's won acclaim for her work, and I think she's even received the Order of the British Empire as well, which is pretty significant. Some of you might recognize the name of this story, Madame Doubtfire, which is because it was turned into a movie starring Robin Williams and Sally Field, and also Mara Wilson, called Mrs. Doubtfire, which a lot of people have fond memories of, and it is indeed, it's a pretty good movie. And so, after you read this book, go check it out, mostly because the movie is a lot better than the book, as you'll find in my review here. I don't know too much else about Anne Fine. This is the first time I've encountered her work, but I would like to check out more of it just to get a feel for what kind of writer she has sort of transformed into. She even got a book published in 2021, so she's been writing for quite a long time and still does. So without further ado, let's talk about Alias, Madame Doubtfire. I will do a summary, a little bit of analysis, and we will move on from there. So Alias, Madame Doubtfire focuses primarily on the Hillard family. They consist of Daniel, the husband, and Miranda, the wife, and their three children, Natalie, Lydia, and Christopher. Unfortunately, the family is going through a divorce as Daniel does not like his wife. She's a bit of a jerk at times, tough to get along with, and Miranda does not like Daniel because he is immature and just seems to joke around too much in a way that makes others feel nervous or anxious or wonder what he's going to do. Just generally irresponsible, and that's created quite the rift between the two of them. Daniel is bitter at his wife as the story starts because she is not allowing him to have his time because they have split custody of the kids, and she's showing up late with the children, or she's showing up early to take them away, and Daniel doesn't really get a say in the matter. And no matter how much he tries to talk to his wife, it mostly just ends up in a shouting match where Daniel yells at his wife and Miranda yells at him. And Daniel has even openly talked about wanting to kill his wife in front of his kids. It seems like he's joking, but also, that's a weird thing to joke about. As the story progresses, Miranda talks about getting a babysitter. Daniel volunteers to do it because he would get to spend more time with the kids after school and whatnot. But Miranda notes that she'd much rather hire someone she can trust, and Daniel responds by making up a bunch of fake names and calling Miranda and pretending to be a bunch of people who don't really sound like good applicants, and she just hangs up on them. And then finally he calls back as a woman that he made up called Madame Doubtfire. Madame Doubtfire is a perfect candidate, has plenty of experience with children, and again, as we find out, Madame Doubtfire is just Daniel in drag, pretending to be a woman in order to spend more time with his children. What's funny is that the children immediately see through Daniel's disguise and realize that Mrs. Doubtfire is just Daniel. But they don't tell Miranda at all. But it's weird that Miranda can't see her own husband in that disguise. Maybe she's just like willing to accept the fake nature of it or something like that. And over time, things get better in the household. The children are pitching in to do chores, and Miranda seems happier as she's able to rely on Mrs. Doubtfire and is no longer busy with her work and her children and all the housework that needs to get done. And one evening, Mrs. Doubtfire and the children and Miranda are all talking, and Miranda talks about Daniel and what really made their relationship fail. And she notes Daniel's immaturity, always being on edge about what he was going to try to do next, being irresponsible. She couldn't really rely on him. And all of that just makes Daniel sad, and he realizes, he was kind of at fault at some way in the marriage. Although he tries to defend himself through Mrs. Doubtfire, but Miranda's not really having it. You would think this would be a shining moment of Daniel, realizing he can't behave this way anymore, but yet he still tries to pretend to be Mrs. Doubtfire. He's clearly not learning the lesson that he should learn here. And when Daniel takes out his children to the theater one time, he talks about how great acting is and how he himself is an actor. And the children point out that if he was such a great actor, he would have been able to act in the best way for the marriage, which Daniel asserts that he could not have done that because it wouldn't have been healthy for the children and it wouldn't have been healthy for Miranda. But the kids tell him that he's not a very good actor. And this just makes him even angrier, and he actually starts yelling at the kids. And even grabs his son Christopher in a very negative way. It's kind of abusive, and it seems like he's not a very good person, but he later apologizes for this. Through a comedy of errors in which Daniel accidentally agrees to be at Miranda's house for a painting event where they're going to paint him nude, at that point he has to switch between Mrs. Doubtfire and Daniel, and eventually Miranda catches him in the act and reveals that she's very embarrassed about it and is mortified by the fact that she trusted Miss Doubtfire, and Daniel just used her trust like this and made everything worse. And she sends Daniel home, but in the process the children become mad, telling both parents that they don't like the way they're behaving, and they actively hate them when they behave this way. So pretty extreme. And when Daniel goes home, Lydia shows up later and tells him that they need to make up and learn to behave better around one another, so that the kids aren't traumatized by all this, and so that everything can go as smoothly as possible. And Daniel agrees to it, and Miranda stops by as well, and they kind of make up and promise to behave better towards one another. They're still divorced, so nothing has changed in that regard. But as the story ends, there's some hope that they're going to be the children are going to be fine, and things are going to move more slowly as it pertains to what is happening in the aftermath of this divorce. In terms of analysis, there is a fair bit to talk about, and not all of it is good. I have a number of problems with this book, which I'll get to in a moment. But one of the themes that Anne Fine is working with in this story is divorce, specifically the aftermath of a divorce, and how it's not easy for people. Indeed, if you get divorced, that's kind of admitting that your relationship has failed, which no one wants to admit. And it's even more difficult for children because they have to see their parents split up, a relationship that they believed was infallible. And even if you admit that your parents didn't have the best relationship, it's still a discord in the house. Not to say that divorce is not necessary. And it's often better for children to see their parents split up than to continue to fight or anything like that. And for the Hillards, divorce is already difficult, but the fighting that takes place between Miranda and Daniel makes everything a lot worse. The children, Lydia, Christopher, and Natalie, are forced to choose. Their parents, try to make him pick sides. Daniel consistently yells at Miranda, and in the company of his children, badmouths his parents, or badmouths Miranda, and jokingly threatens to kill her or something like that, which you would not want to hear from your father. Around Miranda, like, she's very limiting on what the children can do, and she's kind of inhibiting her children from being around her father, which is not what they want. So they're forced to choose sides, and that's just making them anxious. And what's making them more anxious about everything is the fact that Daniel shows up in drag as Mrs. Doubtfire in an effort to spend more time with them, which they like, but they're always worried now that they're going to reveal the truth and get Daniel in trouble. And they don't really know how to address Mrs. Doubtfire because that's their father, but it's also just their babysitter. So what's the nature of that relationship, and how do you properly exhibit it when you're in the presence of someone who doesn't know, like Miranda? And so that's creating a lot of anxiety, a lot of frustration, and the natural end result here is anger. Like anger and frustration that they have to be in the system. If your parents are making you choose and are making your life miserable, you're not going to be happy towards them. It's going to create a lot of resentment. And you see that with the Hillards. There's an interesting quote that I would like to read to you. "They'll never stop loving me. I am their mother. And they'll never stop loving me either. I am their father. There was so much hate between them that each was silenced." Lydia rose. Her rage lent her an ashen, fierce dignity that neither parent had seen before. "I hate you both," she informed them in an unsteady voice, and turning, she walked into her bedroom and shut the door. Christopher rose too. "So do I," he told them. He was in tears. "You are disgusting and ugly, both of you." And that's a really, sad, very climactic type of moment in the story, where the children confront their parents and say, "This is awful behavior. We hate you for what you are doing to each other as well as to us." It's really quality writing on Fine's part, because of that climactic moment where everything in the story leads to that moment, that apex where the children finally confront their parents about everything they're being put through in the story. And at the end of it, there seems to be kind of a hopeful moment, but we have to ask, is there hope for the children in this story? And I want to say yes, kind of, because Miranda and Daniel do kind of make up, and it seems like they've learned their lesson, and probably won't go back to fighting, at least in front of the children. But also, they both seem really immature, and it's likely that this is just one instance of a fight, a brief snapshot of their life, and if you move forward a week or 2 weeks into the future, they'll be fighting about something else. And so ultimately, the children in this story are forced to grow up, forced to be in a position that they don't want to, and that's the unfortunate consequence of divorce sometimes. And I like that Fine is willing to show that here. However, one issue that I have with this story is that Daniel is, for the lack of a better word, he is an asshole. He's written to be an asshole that is redeemed in the end. But the question is he actually redeemed? Through the story, you see him do a number of terrible things. He threatens to murder his wife as a joke. He lies to his family in many ways. He yells at the kids and even grabs Christopher and tries to manhandle him in order to prove a point to him. And the ultimate violation of trust, the ultimate problem, is he pretends to be Madame Doubtfire. He tries to say, or pretend to be this person in order to get closer to his kids, which seems very noble, but again, he's pretending to be someone else, lying to his wife in the process, violating her trust, being in her home when she doesn't want him to be, when he's already a pretty terrible person and she's bad-mouthing him all the way. She believes that Madame Doubtfire is someone she can trust and rely on, and it turns out no, that Daniel has been lying to her the whole time, and when she finds out, she's deeply embarrassed and hurt. And I don't think that's really redeemable. And the weird thing is that Fine kind of acknowledges this immaturity in the story. She points out that, Miranda even says in the story, Daniel was too immature, even at their wedding, he constantly played pranks and lied and made weird jokes, and it made everyone anxious, and it was ultimately the reason the relationship didn't work out. And you would think that maybe he would learn that, but as I pointed out earlier, he learns it, but then he still pretends to be Madame Doubtfire for a little bit. And that's extremely weird, and it's showing that he hasn't really learned his lesson, or he's not willing to absorb the right message from it. And also, this also is maybe illegal, given that he only has his custody of kids for like certain periods of time, like to be around the kids at another point. And I don't even know if Miranda has like a restraining order or anything. Like it seems somewhat illegal, or if not illegal, then just largely unethical, wrong, scary even. Because like, I know this is meant to be funny and whatnot, like Daniel's meant to be a joke, this is black comedy, and it kind of works, but also it kind of doesn't, because we're meant to also sympathize with Daniel. But there are lots of people out there like Daniel who have pestered their wives after being divorced and behaved in this way and ended up killing their wives or killing other people who tried to stop them from seeing their wives or children. And so, like, it's hard to really sympathize with or see Daniel as redeemed, given that he used such terrible methods to get close to his children in the first place. So it's Daniel's just a weird character who just does not work in this story. And then there's a number of other problems in the story, such as the idea of gay panic, where you have Daniel dressing up in drag or dressing up like as a woman, even though he's a man. There might be trans panic there too, given that this is the 1980s. Gay panic and trans panic were still very big things. And you see a little bit of that in the movie too, which is unfortunate, because like the one of the bus drivers is like attracted to Mrs. Doubtfire, but then she sees that he's a man and he's like, oh no, that's weird. And it's supposed to be funny that someone is dressing as a woman even though they're a man. And yeah, it's just a weird relic of the 80s, and even a bigger problem now because you see people still targeting gay and trans folks for being gay and trans, and it feels like the wrong moment to try to read this, given everything that's happening in the world today. And then also related to that, what I was talking about with Daniel is the unlikable characters. But also, Miranda isn't very likable either. She's somewhat more sympathetic, but ultimately she's written to be a bit of a nag, like kind of justifying Daniel's behavior or something like that. And I wouldn't say the children are unlikable, but they're certainly not well written. They're kind of vague and just sort of facilitating the plot. So I feel like Fine could have done a better job of writing these characters. And ultimately, I feel like the story's potential is squandered, because I think Fine was trying to write a story of divorce and how the children are harmed in the process, and how there's a need for parents to work out the conflict and not drag their children into it. But in between all of that, you have Daniel dressing up in drag and terrorizing his family, because they're made more anxious by the process, and Miranda is deeply embarrassed when she finds out. And I don't feel that Fine is telling the story effectively, at least the story that she wants to tell. There could have been other ways, and there are times when it shines through, but it's hindered by the writing and hindered by the events in the plot that kind of undermine the overall message. Which is why I feel like the movie does this such better. Like it definitely has the same problems, but it also has Robin Williams, who helps mitigate at least some of the problems, and it's also written a bit differently. Of course, he also like Robin Williams' character tries to murder Pierce Brosnan's character in the movie because he's trying to have a relationship with Miranda. So it's not made much better, but it still has Robin Williams, so it's quality in that way. Anyway, those were my thoughts on Alias, Madame Doubtfire. As you can see, I'm not a fan of the movie, and I do not recommend that you seek it out. I'm not a fan of the book, and I do not recommend that you seek it out, just because I'm sure there's other stories that do this in a much more effective way. The one that I can think of that I read pretty recently is Fleischman is in Trouble by Taffy Brodekar-Akner. I definitely recommend that you go seek that out. I'm very much looking forward to finally watching the Hulu series when I get a chance, as it was recently adapted into that. So if you want to read this, check it out from your local library, but don't buy it. It's not worth it unless you find it at like a dollar store or something like that. But even then, you're spending $1 on very, very poorly written like black comedy type stuff here. Anyways, if you read this before, you simply want to comment on something I said here, do so below. Let's have a discussion about Madame Doubtfire. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can find out about this book or this author if they don't already know. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and disguised travel. Farewell.